Deadwood summer of 1876. The sun burned down on streets choked with dust horse hooves and the ceaseless shuffle of miners and drifters. The smell of whiskey sweat and gun oil hung in the air so thick it clung to every throat. Deadwood was no place for softness. Here a man's worth was measured in ounces of gold or the weight of his revolver, and a woman's worth, if she was given any at all, was too often measured in what she could bear, what she could clean, or what she could sell. Abigail Turner knew that bitter truth all too well. She stood stiff in the center of a jeering crowd, caught between her father's hard scowl and her brother's smug grin. She was 23 too old, they said, too lean, too sunburned to catch the eye of any respectable husband. A lifetime of farm labor had hardened her hands and browned her skin, leaving little of the delicate girl her mother once tried to protect. To her father Elias she was a burden. To her brother Clive she was a joke. And now to the man standing across from them, the saloon keeper Horace Greevy, she was a transaction. Horace jingled a fat pouch of coins, laughing through his whiskey-stained teeth. "More than she's worth," he crowed, "but I'm feeling generous today." The crowd howled with cruel delight. Miners elbowed each other, drunk cowhands shouted wagers about how long before she broke under saloon work. Abigail kept her chin high, though her chest roiled with shame and fury. Her father spat in the dirt and turned away, satisfied to be rid of her. Not 1 ounce of regret flickered in his eyes. Then the crowd shifted. A man was walking forward slow and steady, as if the mountain itself had decided to step down into town. His clothes were rough buckskin, his beard thick, his face half hidden beneath the wide brim of a battered hat. A hunting knife rode his hip. A satchel of hide weighed on his shoulder. He said nothing as he moved through the circle of onlookers until he came to stand before Horace Greevy. The saloon keeper sneered. "What do you want, Boone?" The stranger, Wayne Boone, set his satchel down. The heavy thud silenced the crowd. Pelts and leather spilled out the work of a long, hard winter. His voice came low and even. "If she's useless to you, I'll take her. Not for pouring drinks, not for bearing sons. I'll build her a roof. If she wants, she can call it home." A hush fell. Even Horace blinked. Abigail's father stammered, caught off guard, but Wayne's gaze never left the young woman's face. Beneath the shadow of his hat, his eyes held no hunger, no cruelty, only something she had never seen in a man's eyes before. Permission. He spoke again, softer this time, words meant only for her. "You can walk away if you want, but if you'd rather leave with me, I'll see you're never treated like property again." Abigail's throat tightened. Her heart hammered in her chest. No one, not her father, not her brother, not a single man in Deadwood had ever given her a choice, and yet here it was, plain as the dust under her boots. Slowly she nodded. Wayne turned and she followed. Just like that, the deal was broken. The jeers faded behind her, replaced by a silence heavier than gun smoke. Her family did not call her back. The crowd did not stop them. Deadwood simply watched as a woman walked away, not owned, not sold, but free. The trail wound into the Black Hills, a serpent of rock and pine that swallowed the noise of town. Abigail rode astride a stubborn mule, hands tight on the reins. Wayne walked ahead, his stride, steady boots crunching gravel. She waited for it. The barked command, the rough hand, the punishment she had always known from men. But none came. Hours passed in quiet. Birds replaced the clamor of hammers. The air grew cooler beneath the trees. When they stopped at a stream, Wayne dipped a tin cup, offered it to her first. He did not touch her, did not force her hand. Only when she drank did he take a sip himself. By nightfall they reached a clearing. A rough frame of logs stood half-finished, its roof, a patchwork of canvas and branches. A blackened fire pit marked old flames. Wayne gestured to it, his face caught in the last red light of dusk. "This ain't safety," he said. "Not yet. But there's room here for a cabin, a real one. You can stay tonight, and tomorrow we'll start building. Or come first light, I'll take you back to town. The choice is yours." Abigail's breath caught. The words were strange, almost foreign. The choice was hers. She had never heard such a thing, never been granted it. She sat near the fire, wrapped in Wayne's old coat, far too big for her shoulders. He served her beans and jerky before taking his own share. And when the stars spread above them, Wayne laid his bedroll outside beneath the lean-to, leaving her the shelter. "You can sleep inside," he said. "Canvas leaks some, but it'll hold." Abigail tried to ask if he wasn't, if he didn't expect, but the words tangled in her throat. Wayne only nodded. "I'll be out here. For the first time in her life, she lay down in darkness, without fear of a hand yanking her awake, without dread of footsteps approaching. She listened to the wind threading through the pines, the steady sound of a man who asked for nothing, and sleep claimed her gently like a long-denied mercy. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know what kind of man Wayne Boone truly was, or what life waited in the Black Hills. But as the fire faded to embers and the stars wheeled above, one truth settled deep in her chest. Something had shifted. She was no longer the girl who had been sold. She was a woman standing at the edge of a new path, one she had chosen for herself. Morning broke, soft and cold, the sky pale with mist, as Abigail stirred beneath Wayne's coat. For a moment she did not remember where she was. The smell of pine and smoke, the weight of quiet all around her. It was so unlike the Turner farm where Dawn always came with her father's barked orders and her brother's mocking laugh. Here there was only stillness and the steady scrape of steel on wood. Wayne was already at work sharpening an axe on a whetstone. The sound carried through the clearing patient and unhurried. Abigail sat up, clutching the coat around her. The sight of him, broad-shouldered, solid as the timbers he worked, was both reassuring and strange. She had never been near a man who spoke so little, yet filled the air with more weight than any shouted command. "Morning," he said, simply glancing at her. She nodded, her throat dry. He handed her a tin cup of water and a small piece of dried bread. "We'll start on the walls today. Cabin won't build itself." The words were plain, but something in them stirred a spark inside her. He wasn't asking her to scrub floors or serve drinks. He was asking her to build, to work beside him, not beneath him. The first swings of the axe jarred her arms until her teeth rattled. The logs were heavy, the ground uneven, her palms blistering fast. More than once she wanted to throw down the tool to tell him she wasn't strong enough. But Wayne only showed her once, then stepped back, letting her try, letting her fail, letting her try again. He never mocked, never pressed, never sighed at her mistakes. His silence was space she had never been given. By midday, sweat streaked her temples, her arms shook, and her breath came ragged. Yet when she looked at the rough line of logs stacked into place, a wild pride filled her chest. This was not her father's farm, where every seed she planted was called useless. This was hers. They paused by the stream, eating jerky in the shade. Wayne asked no questions, and Abigail was grateful. But as they worked through the afternoon, she found herself glancing at him, wondering who he had been before the mountains claimed him. His hands were rough with old scars, his face lined by grief more than years. There was a heaviness in him that went beyond solitude. That night, as the fire crackled low, Abigail finally asked, "Were you always up here alone?" Wayne poked at the coals with a stick, his jaw tight. "No, I was a carpenter. Built barns, porches, coffins. Had a little house near the river." "What happened?" He stared into the fire a long time before answering. "Took a wife. Her name was Leah. Sweet voice. Loved birds. Lost her and the boy to cholera. After that," his shoulders rose and fell. "Didn't see much reason to talk anymore." Abigail's chest ached. She had expected gruffness, maybe cruelty hidden in his silence, but not sorrow. She said nothing, only sat with him, letting the crackle of flames fill the quiet. Later, when she lay on the canvas bed inside the frame of the cabin, she thought of her own mother, gentle but powerless against Elias's anger. She remembered the pages of a Bible her mother once pressed into her hands, how her father burned them, saying no man wanted a wife who could outread him. Abigail had clung to those scraps until they turned to ash in her memory. She could barely read her own name now. The thought tightened her chest until she couldn't sleep. In the dim firelight, she whispered, "My father said I was born wrong. Not pretty enough, not fertile enough, not smart enough. He burned the words my mother gave me. Said no man wanted a woman who could outthink him." Wayne didn't speak at once. Then he stirred, pulled a flatboard from his tools, and drew 3 letters in charcoal, ABI. He held it out to her. "You'll learn them again," he said. Her breath caught. Tentatively, she traced the letters with trembling fingers, then copied them, uneven and awkward. But they were hers. For the first time, she held her name in her own hand. She pressed the board to her chest as though it were treasure. That night, sleep came with tears wetting her cheeks, but they were not the tears of shame she had known all her life. They were tears of something new, something like hope. The days stretched into weeks. Abigail's hands hardened, her back ached, but the cabin rose higher log by log. She planted wildflowers by the steps, their fragile blooms a stubborn defiance against the rough-hewn walls. Every evening, Wayne cooked beans and meat, always serving her first. Every night he carried his bedroll outside, never once crossing the threshold of trust he had laid between them. When autumn crept into the hills, the cabin stood solid, a roof that kept the rain out, a hearth that warmed the chill. Abigail touched its walls with pride. She was no longer a burden. She was a builder. But peace in the Black Hills was fragile. One afternoon, the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. Abigail's stomach dropped as she saw two riders crest the ridge, her father and brother, their faces twisted with disdain as they dismounted, boots sinking into the damp earth. "Well, look at this dump," Elias sneered. "Didn't expect you to crawl this far into the dirt." Wayne stepped down from the porch, axe in hand, voice low but steady. "You're not welcome here." "She's my daughter," Elias snapped. "I decide where she belongs." "She's not your property," Wayne said evenly. Clive spat in the dirt. "She's a debt. A mouth we fed too long. Now a rich miner in Helena's offering 10 head of cattle for a wife. We've come to collect." Abigail trembled inside the cabin, her heart hammering. She could stay hidden. She could let Wayne stand for her. But deep inside, she knew this moment belonged to her. The door creaked as she stepped out. Dirt clung to her hands from the flowers she had planted. She lifted her chin, meeting her father's eyes. "I'm not going with you," she said. Elias blinked, stunned. "Excuse me." I said, "No, I'm not for sale, not anymore." Clive lunged a step forward, but Wayne shifted, the axe gleaming in his grip. "You heard her? She made her choice." "You ungrateful girl," Elias spat. "After all we did for you, you sold me." Abigail cut in, her voice, trembling but clear. "You didn't raise me. You tolerated me until you could profit." The words hung heavy in the mountain air. From the trees, a few trappers and valley folk had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Elias saw them, watching his bravado cracking. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Maybe, Abigail answered, her spine straight. "But it will be my regret, not yours." For a long, searing moment, no one moved. Then Elias cursed, mounted his horse, and turned away. Clive threw a glare sharp as a knife at Wayne before following. Abigail's knees weakened, but she stood, firm breath, ragged. The cabin behind her, the man beside her, the flowers at her feet, they were hers now. Her choice. For the first time in her life, no one could take that from her. The mountains grew colder with each passing day. Pines whispered with autumn winds, and nights stretched long and brittle. Abigail wrapped herself in layers of wool and Wayne's old coat, but still the chill seeped into her bones. Yet she bore it with a stubborn pride. She had chosen this life, and now she would see it through. Wayne hunted, each morning rifle slung across his broad shoulders, boots silent on the frosted ground. Abigail stayed behind, splitting wood until her palms blistered, hauling water from the stream, mending the seams of their clothes. Each strike of the axe, each heavy bucket, each stitch was proof that she was not useless. But winter in the Black Hills was unforgiving. The first snow fell early, bearing the trail to Deadwood in a white silence. One evening, as Abigail stirred a pot of beans over the fire, the mule brayed sharply. She rushed to the door just as Wayne stumbled into the clearing, snow clinging to his beard, his shirt dark with blood. "Wayne," she cried, running to him. He waved her off with a grunt, teeth clenched. "Elk caught me with an antler." "Just a graze." But the blood soaking his side told a harsher truth. Abigail dragged him inside, her hands shaking as she pressed rags against the wound. Wayne's jaw was stone, his breath shallow but steady. For the first time since leaving Deadwood, fear clawed her chest. Not fear of him, not fear of her family, but fear of losing the one soul who had given her freedom. For days, Wayne could hardly move. He leaned on a carved stick to shuffle from the bed to the fire, each step a battle. Abigail became the strength of the cabin. She split wood until her arms ached, fetched water with numb fingers, kept the fire alive against the biting wind. At night, she sat beside him, reading haltingly from the handful of words he had taught her, letters shaky but spoken aloud with stubborn determination. The valley folk whispered that she would die up there with him, but Abigail did not leave. One night, as wind howled through the cracks, she stitched a bandage with trembling fingers, her eyes burning from exhaustion. Wayne watched her silently, his face pale in the firelight. At last he murmured, voice rough as gravel, "You're stronger than this whole mountain." Her hands stilled, tears rising hot and sudden. "Why do you say that?" "Because I've seen storms split trees in half, seen wolves bring down elk twice their size, but none of it bends you." her head bowed, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. No one had ever called her strong. No one had ever seen her as more than a burden. Wayne reached out his rough hand, covering hers gently. The touch was steady, not demanding, not claiming, only present, like a stone in a rushing river. The fire glowed between them, warming more than the room. By spring, the snow melted. Streams ran full again, and the black hills bloomed with green. Wayne's wound healed, leaving only a scar. He walked without the stick now, though a limp sometimes marked his stride. Abigail planted new flowers beside the cabin, bright splashes of color against the wood. Each bloom was a defiance against every word of worthlessness her father had ever spoken. It was on such an afternoon, when the air was warm and the scent of pine thick, that 3 riders appeared on the trail. Their leader, a man named Lyle, tipped his hat with a practiced smile. "Miss Turner," he said, handing her a folded paper. "We've got a claim down in town. Need someone who can read receipts, keep ledgers, pays fair roof over your head. You'd be the first woman hired for brains, not bed warming." Abigail's chest tightened as she read the offer aloud, stumbling over words but grasping their meaning. A real job, a chance to stand on her own. No debts, no dependents. For a long moment, the paper burned in her hand, like a torch lit against the dark. That night, she sat by the fire staring at the offer. Wayne said nothing, carving cedar in silence. At last, he set the wood down and placed something beside her, a small hand-carved map. "If you want to go," he said, "this will take you down. Easiest trail after snow melt." Abigail looked at him, startled. "And if I don't want to go, keep it anyway, so you'll always know the way back." Her voice broke. "Wayne, aren't you going to stop me, tell me to stay?" His eyes softened. "You're not mine to keep, that's the point." 2 mornings later, the wagon came rattling up the trail. Lyle waved from the seat. "You ready, miss?" Abigail stood with the carved map in one hand, the offer in the other. Her heart thundered as she looked down the trail that led back to Deadwood, back to everything she had once been denied. And then she shook her head. "No." Lyle frowned. "You sure?" "I already live where I want to be." Her voice was firm, clear. She turned back up the slope, finding Wayne waiting on the porch. She pressed the map into his palm, smiling through the tears in her eyes. "Turns out I don't need it. I'm already home." Wayne didn't smile, not fully, but his nod carried more weight than any words, and his eyes held a quiet light she had never seen before. From that spring on, the cabin became more than shelter. Abigail laid chalk and slate on the long table Wayne had built, teaching children from the valley their letters in exchange for eggs, flour, or corn. Mothers lingered at the door, listening as their little ones spelled their names for the first time. Abigail's voice, once silenced by scorn, now filled the cabin with steady warmth. And when she looked up, she often saw Wayne watching from the porch, carving stools for the children, quiet pride written in every line of his weathered face. One Sunday morning, beneath the tallest pine, the valley folk gathered. Abigail wore a white dress stitched from flour sacks, wildflowers braided into her hair. Wayne stood beside her in a clean shirt, beard trimmed neat. Children scattered petals at her feet as a broken fiddle played a thin but sweet tune. Abigail took his hands, voice steady. "I used to believe I was nothing, that my worth came only from what others could take. But this man built me more than a cabin. He gave me a place to stand, a name to carry, a life of my own choosing." Wayne's voice cracked as he answered. "I've built many things in my life, barns, coffins, porches, but nothing was ever finished until her. Today I call her my wife, not because she is mine, but because she made this place a home." The crowd cheered, children clapped, and when Wayne slipped the hand-carved wooden ring onto Abigail's finger, the forest itself seemed to hush in reverence. That night, as the cabin glowed with firelight and children whispered the alphabet at the long table, Abigail smiled through her tears. After a lifetime of being called useless, she had finally found her truth. She was more than a daughter cast aside, more than a debt unpaid. She was a wife, a teacher, a woman who had built her own worth with her own hands. And she was home. Summer in the Black Hills came with a fierce kind of beauty. The mountains turned green, streams rushed loud with meltwater, and wildflowers spilled across the meadows in colors Abigail had never seen back on the Turner farm. The cabin, once a rough frame of logs, now stood strong against the wind. Smoke curled from its chimney each morning, and children's laughter sometimes echoed through the clearing as the valley folk brought their little ones to learn. For Abigail, every day felt like a quiet miracle. She no longer woke to her father's bark or her brother's scorn. Instead, she rose to the smell of pine and the soft scrape of Wayne carving wood outside the porch. She had never thought herself fit to teach, but each time a child traced letters on a slate, each time a mother pressed her hand with thanks, a warmth spread in her chest. She was useful now. Not as property, not as labor, but as herself. And yet even in this peace, shadows lingered. Wayne seldom spoke of the past, but sometimes in the stillness of night, Abigail would wake to find him sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, as though listening to voices long gone. Once she heard him murmur a name, Leah, soft as a prayer. She did not interrupt. Instead, she lay quietly, realizing that the grief he carried was not a wound that could heal quickly, but a scar that would live beside him always. She understood scars. Still, as the seasons turned, they found a rhythm together. Wayne hunted, built, repaired. Abigail taught, tended the small patch of flowers, kept their home bright with touches of her own. It was not a life of comfort, but it was theirs. One evening, as the sun sank gold across the ridge, Wayne brought back a bundle of cedar planks. He set them down beside the cabin and handed her a small box carved with simple patterns of leaves. "It's for you," he said. She opened it, finding inside a stack of charcoal sticks and scraps of paper. "So you can keep writing," he added. Her eyes burned with sudden tears. She touched the box as though it were fragile. "Wayne, no one's given me something just for me." He only shrugged. Seemed right. But behind the simplicity of his words, she saw the truth. This was not just a gift. It was a vow, silent and steady, that he believed in her mind as much as in her hands. That night she filled the first page with letters, shaky but determined, her name written clear across the top, Abigail Turner Boone. The next morning brought news that shattered the calm. A trapper named Harlan arrived at the cabin, his face tight with worry. He carried rumors from Deadwood that Elias Turner had been boasting in the saloon, saying he'd find a way to reclaim the daughter who had shamed him or see her destroyed. He claimed no man defied him and kept his pride. Some said he'd been drinking too deep, others that he'd made promises to men far more dangerous than he was. Abigail's stomach clenched as the words sank in. She had thought her father's shadow left behind in that mountain clearing when he turned his horse away. But pride was a cruel master, and Elias Turner had always served it faithfully. Wayne listened without interruption, his jaw tight. When Harlan left, he set his tools aside and looked at her with steady eyes. "If he comes, you'll have to be ready." "I already told him no," she whispered. "What more can I do?" "Stand by it," Wayne said. "Sometimes that's harder than saying it the first time." The days after that felt heavy, as though the mountain itself was holding its breath. Abigail taught the children as usual, but her ears pricked at every sound in the woods. Her hands trembled whenever hoofbeats echoed in the valley. Wayne worked on repairing the roof, his movements calm, but she saw the way his eyes flicked off into the trail. One evening, as dusk bled across the sky, Abigail found him sharpening his axe, the same tool he had held when Elias last came. "You think he'll really return?" she asked softly. Wayne looked up, his gaze unreadable. "A man like your father don't forget shame, and he don't forgive it." Her chest tightened. "I don't want you hurt because of me." He shook his head slowly. "Abby, you were never the cause. The blame's his. A man who'd sell his own blood for cattle's already broken. All you did was walk away." His words wrapped around her like armor, fragile but real. Still fear gnawed at her. Not for herself, she had faced her father once, but for Wayne, who had given her more than she thought she deserved. The threat came sooner than either expected. It was a Sunday afternoon, the children just gone home, when the sound of horses split the valley. Abigail's heart lurched. From the ridge rode not just Elias and Clive, but three hard-faced men she didn't recognize. Their rifles gleamed in the sun. Elias dismounted, first, his voice carrying like a whip. "Abigail, you'll come with me now, no more nonsense." Wayne stepped forward, axe in hand, his voice calm as ever. "She already told you. She's not yours to command." One of the strangers laughed, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "We're not here to argue. There's 10 head of cattle waiting for her back in Helena. Best move aside, mountain man." Abigail's blood ran cold. The men looked rougher than her father, more dangerous. For them, she was not even a daughter or a shame to be mended, only a price to be collected. Her father smirked, certain now that he had the power. "See, girl, even if you think you're something more, you're still worth what men say you're worth." Abigail's breath shook. For a heartbeat, the old fear clawed her throat. But then she remembered the weight of the box Wayne had given her, the flowers she had planted, the sound of children spelling their names. She remembered the board with her letters, her name written by her own hand, and something inside her straightened. She stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Wayne. Her voice rang clear across the clearing. I told you once, Father, I'm not for sale. Not to you, not to them, not to anyone. The men laughed, but Wayne did not move his axe steady. You heard her, he said. Clive sneered. Then we'll take her anyway. He moved for his rifle. In that instant, the clearing shifted. Valley folk appeared from the trees, trappers, mothers, even children, drawn by the sound of hooves. They had come with no weapons, but their presence a wall of eyes bearing witness. Elias froze, his face twisting, as he realized the truth. This was no longer a daughter he could barter away in the shadows. This was a woman who had found her place in a community ready to stand with her. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Elias spat, fury burning in his eyes. You'll regret this, Abigail, maybe she said, but it will be my regret, not yours. The words struck harder than any weapon. Slowly, Elias mounted his horse. The hired men exchanged uneasy glances, then followed. Clive lingered, hatred etched deep in his face before turning away. When the last hoofbeat faded, Abigail's knees buckled. Wayne caught her, his arms solid steady. She buried her face against his chest, her body shaking, not with fear, but with release. She had stood, and this time she had not stood alone. The Black Hills seemed quieter after Elias and his men rode away, but it was not the peace Abigail once knew. The silence now carried weight like storm clouds hidden behind the ridge. Every creak of the forest, every echo of hoofbeats on distant stone set her nerves on edge. She knew her father's pride too well. He would not accept defeat, not after being turned back twice. Still, life had to go on. Abigail taught the Valley children their letters, their small voices filling the cabin with laughter and determination. Wayne worked the land-carving beams, setting traps, mending tools. But beneath every task lay an unspoken truth: the danger had not passed. One evening, as the sun sank red behind the peaks, Abigail found Wayne sitting on the porch cleaning his rifle. She hesitated in the doorway, her hands dusted with flour from kneading bread. You think they'll come again, she said softly. Wayne didn't look up. A man like Elias don't walk away. Not when his pride's at stake. Not when he's made promises to others. Her chest tightened. And if he brings more men... Wayne set the rifle down, his gaze finally lifting to meet hers. Then we'll face it. Together. She wanted to believe the steadiness in his voice, but fear still gnawed at her. Not fear of being taken, she had found her voice her choice. What frightened her now was losing Wayne, the man who had given her that freedom. That night she lay awake listening to the rhythm of his carving knife outside. Sleep came only in fragments broken by dreams of fire and hoofbeats. 2 weeks later, those dreams bled into reality. It was near midnight when the mule brayed. Panicked. Abigail jolted upright, heart racing. A flicker of orange lit the sky beyond the trees. She rushed to the door, Wayne already there, rifle in hand. The barn, small and newly built, was ablaze. Flames roared against the night sparks, leaping high into the dark. The animals screamed, thrashing in their stalls. Wayne didn't hesitate. He charged toward the fire, hacking at the door with his axe. Abigail ran after him, pulling at the smoldering latch with bare hands. Smoke stung her eyes, heat seared her skin, but she didn't stop until the mule stumbled free, wild with terror. Behind them, a rifle cracked. The bullet slammed into the dirt near Wayne's boots. Abigail gasped, spinning toward the tree line. Shapes moved in the shadows, men on horseback, torches in hand. Her father's voice rang out, harsh and triumphant. I warned you, girl. You think you can shame me? I'll burn this mountain to the ground if I have to. Wayne raised his rifle, firing, once the shot echoing through the valley. A rider yelped, tumbling from his horse. Chaos erupted. The others returned fire bullets whining past the cabin walls. Inside, Wayne barked. Abigail scrambled back, dragging the mule with her, until it broke free and bolted into the night. She stumbled into the cabin, heart pounding. Wayne ducked in after her, slamming the heavy door shut. The gunfire outside rattled her bones. She pressed herself against the wall, clutching the carved box he had given her weeks before, as though it could anchor her. Wayne crouched by the window, steady as stone, returning fire with measured shots. Minutes stretched like hours. Shouts echoed through the clearing, mingled with the crackle of the burning barn. The attackers circled, their voices cruel with drink and anger. Abigail could hear her brothers sneer above the din. Give her up, Boone. No woman's worth dying for. Wayne's reply was calm, unshaken. She already chose. That's worth more than cattle or coin. Abigail's throat tightened. Even as bullets tore splinters from the logs, he spoke of her choice as if it were sacred. The attackers made one final rush, torches, flaring hooves thundering. Wayne fired twice more, the recoil jarring his shoulder. One rider fell, another swerved. The rest cursed, turning back into the night. When silence finally fell, the barn lay in ruins, smoldering embers glowing red against the dark. Abigail stood in the doorway, her body trembling. She had never known such fear, and yet never felt such fierce resolve. Wayne lowered his rifle, his face pale in the firelight. "They'll be back," he said quietly. Abigail stepped closer, her voice raw but steady. "Then we'll be ready." For a long moment he looked at her, the weight of his grief and his strength in his eyes. Then he nodded once. The next days were a blur of work. Together they salvaged what they could from the barn, rebuilt fences, stored supplies inside the cabin. Wayne reinforced the walls with stone-set traps along the trail. Abigail gathered herbs with the valley women, learning remedies for wounds she prayed she would not have to use. At night, when the fire burned low, she sat beside him, copying words by candlelight. Her letters grew steadier, her sentences longer. Once, as she traced the word home across the page, she caught Wayne watching her. His eyes softened in a way that made her chest ache. "You built this," she whispered. "No," he said. "We did." The bond between them deepened in those quiet nights, forged not by romance, whispered in shadows, but by survival, by respect, by the unshakable knowledge that they stood or fell together. But the threat was not gone. Elias Turner's pride was a wound festering in the dark, and pride, Abigail knew, could drive a man to madness. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the horizon, Wayne laid a hand on her shoulder. "If he comes again, it won't be to scare us. It'll be to finish it." Abigail met his gaze, her own steady. "Then let him come. I'm not the girl he sold anymore." Wayne gave a slow nod, his jaw tightening. For a long moment they stood together in the doorway of the cabin, watching the shadows deepen over the black hills. The mountain was quiet again, too quiet. And somewhere out there, her father was gathering his pride like kindling, ready to strike a final match. The days shortened as autumn tipped toward another winter. Frost crept along the cabin roof each dawn, and Abigail could see her breath in the morning air. Still, the valley held a fragile peace. Children came with their slates, mothers with baskets of eggs, men with nods of respect for Wayne. Life in its quiet way was beginning to root itself in the Black Hills. But Abigail knew it could not last. Every night she dreamed of fire, of hoofbeats, of her father's voice ringing through the trees. Pride was a disease that did not heal. Elias Turner had lost twice, once when she walked away in Deadwood, and again when she faced him at the cabin before his hired men. He would not accept that defeat, not while breath still filled his chest. The storm came sooner than she feared. It was a bitter evening, the air sharp with cold. Wayne was splitting logs, his breath puffing white, while Abigail stirred stew over the hearth. Then came the sound, distant at first, then growing louder. Hooves, many of them. Her stomach clenched. She rushed to the door. A line of riders moved through the trees, torches, flaring rifles glinting. At their head rode Elias, his face carved hard by fury, Clive at his side. There were more with them this time, 6, maybe 7 grim men with eyes like wolves. Wayne's axe stilled in his hands. He set it aside and reached for his rifle, leaning by the porch. His voice was low, steady. "Get inside, Abby." But she did not move. "No, this time I stand with you." The riders pulled into the clearing, horses snorting hooves, churning mud. Elias swung down from the saddle, torch in hand. His eyes burned with madness. "You've shamed me," for the last time he spat. "You think you can defy me, girl? You think this mountain makes you strong? I'll show you what strength is." Wayne stepped forward, rifle steady at his side. "Leave now, Elias. You don't have to do this." Elias laughed, bitter and cracked. "Don't I? My name's already dirt in Deadwood," they whispered in the saloons. "My daughter chose a hermit over her own blood. You took her from me, Boone. Took my pride. There's only one way to fix that." He raised the torch, flinging it toward the cabin. Abigail gasped as the flame licked across the porch post. Wayne fired one shot clean. The torch spun into the mud, extinguished. The clearing erupted. Rifles roared, sparks flashing in the night. Abigail darted back inside, heart hammering, as splinters burst from the walls. Wayne crouched by the window, returning fire with calm precision. For every shot he loosed, another rang back, bullets whining through the logs. Abigail grabbed the bucket by the door, dousing the smoldering wood where the torch had landed. Smoke curled, but the cabin held. She coughed, eyes stinging, then seized the small pistol Wayne had kept hidden, beneath the table. Her hands trembled, but she held it tight. Outside, men shouted, circling. Hooves thundered as they tried to flank the cabin. Wayne shifted to another window, his voice grim. They'll try to burn us out. Hold steady. Her fear wanted to choke her, but she forced her breath slow. She was not the girl who had cowered on the Turner farm. She had built this home brick by brick, word by word. She would not see it stolen. A shadow loomed at the window. Abigail raised the pistol, fired. The blast deafened her, the recoil jarring her wrist. The man outside screamed, stumbling back into the dark. Her chest heaved, but she did not falter. Wayne's eyes flicked to her, a spark of fierce pride in his gaze. Good. The fight dragged on. Bullets tore bark from the trees, smoke thickened the air. The barn was gone, nothing left to burn but the cabin itself. Elias's voice rang out through the chaos. Give her up, Boone. She's mine to settle, and you know it. No woman walks free from my name. Abigail's fury boiled over. She flung the door open, stepping onto the porch. Smoke curled around her firelight, glinting on her eyes. I am not yours, she shouted, her voice carrying like a bell through the valley. I never was. I am my own. And if you burn this cabin, if you kill me, you'll still never own me. For a heartbeat, the clearing stilled. Even the horses shifted uneasily at the force of her cry. Wayne was at her side in an instant, rifle raised, eyes locked on the riders. The valley folk had begun to gather at the edge of the trees, drawn by the gunfire. Faces appeared, trappers, mothers, young men with hunting bows. They did not raise weapons, but their presence swelled the air with witness. Elias's face twisted as he realized he was surrounded not by enemies with guns, but by something stronger, a community that saw him for what he was. A tyrant, a man who had tried to sell his daughter, a man undone by his own pride. Clive snarled, raising his rifle. We'll finish this now. But Wayne was faster. His shot rang sharp. Clive's rifle spun from his hands as he fell back, with a cry, wounded but alive. The hired men cursed their bravado breaking. One by one, they pulled their horses away, disappearing into the night. Elias stood frozen, rage and shame choking him. His eyes locked on Abigail, burning with hatred. You think you've won, girl, he spat. You think this mountain makes you more than the nothing you were born. Abigail's voice was steady, though her knees shook. I don't need the mountain to make me more. I made myself more, and you'll never take that away. The words struck harder than bullets. Elias's shoulders slumped. For the first time, the fire in his eyes faltered. He spat into the mud, turned, and mounted his horse. Without another word, he rode into the darkness. The clearing fell silent, save for the hiss of smoke and the crackle of dying embers. Abigail stood trembling, the pistol still in her hand. Wayne gently took it from her, setting it aside. You did it, he murmured. Her breath came ragged. No, we did. He gave a slow nod, the faintest curve of a smile touching his lips. The valley folk drifted away, leaving the mountain quiet once more. The danger had passed for now. But in Abigail's chest, something stronger than fear burned. Not just survival, not just defiance. Strength. She was no longer the girl sold for coins in Deadwood. She was a woman who had faced gunfire, in her own blood, and stood unbroken. And beside her, Wayne Boone had stood too, not as her keeper, but as her equal. The first snows of winter swept across the Black Hills again, soft but unyielding. Smoke curled from the cabin chimney as Abigail stirred a pot over the hearth. The scars of the autumn attack still lingered. The barn stood in blackened ruins, the cabin walls bore pockmarks from bullets, and the ground outside carried faint ridges where horses once thundered through. But the cabin still stood. So did they. Elias Turner did not return. Rumors drifted from Deadwood weeks later, whispers of a man gone bitter, a family broken by pride. Some said Elias had left the territory. Others swore they saw him in the saloon drinking himself hollow. Abigail did not know which was true, and for the first time she did not care. His shadow no longer reached the Black Hills. Life went on. Wayne hunted less that winter, his limp stronger in the cold, but Abigail had learned enough to snare rabbits and dress them herself. The valley folk brought them flour and corn in trade for lessons, and children's laughter once again filled the cabin. Each morning Abigail laid chalk across the table, guiding small hands to shape letters. Each evening she sat by the fire practicing her own writing by candlelight, her sentences growing longer, steadier. It was not ease. The winds cut sharp wood piles, dwindled, and food ran lean. But every hardship now carried meaning. For the first time in her life, Abigail did not feel like a burden. She felt like a partner. One evening, as the storm howled outside, she found Wayne seated by the fire, carving a length of cedar. He looked up as she entered, his eyes catching the glow. In his rough hands lay a half-finished chair, small in size. For the children, he explained. Too many stand during lessons. Abigail touched the wood, her chest swelling with quiet pride. She had seen him carve hundreds of things, planks, beams, tools. But here was something different, something for the future. She smiled faintly. You're always building. His voice came soft. It's what I know, but you've built more than I ever could. You've built something that lasts. Her cheeks warmed. For years she had heard only her father's scorn, her brother's sneers. Now, sitting in the flickering light of the cabin she helped raise, she felt the truth of Wayne's words. She had built, and it was hers. When spring returned, the valley bloomed in colors brighter than she remembered. The children planted gardens around the cabin, trading lessons for seedlings and eggs. Mothers lingered longer at the door, speaking of hope. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It had become a place of learning, a place of gathering. On a Sunday morning, the valley folk came with baskets of food with flowers woven into garlands. Beneath the tall pine near the stream, they gathered once more, not for defense, but for celebration. Abigail wore a dress stitched from flour sacks, its rough seams softened by the wildflowers braided in her hair. Wayne stood beside her, beard trimmed, his clean shirt smelling faintly of cedar. The broken fiddle played, and children scattered petals at her feet. With the community as witness, they clasped hands. Abigail spoke first, her voice carrying strong through the meadow. I was once told I was nothing, sold for coins, measured in cattle, dismissed as useless. But this man, her voice broke with emotion, then steadied, he gave me a place to stand. He gave me a choice when no one else ever did. Today I stand here by choice, not as property, not as a burden, but as his partner, his wife. Wayne's voice cracked as he answered. I've built barns, porches, coffins. I've built cabins that sheltered through storms. But nothing I ever built was whole until her. Today I call her my wife, not because she belongs to me, but because she made me a home. Cheers rose, children clapped. And when Wayne slipped the carved wooden ring onto her finger, the Black Hills themselves seemed to still, as if the mountain bore witness. That evening, as firelight glowed within the cabin, Abigail sat at the table, her hand resting on the ring. Around her, children whispered their letters. Mothers traded goods, and Wayne carved stools for the growing number of little ones. The cabin pulsed with life, laughter, and the warmth of a community stitched together by resilience. Later, when the last of the visitors had gone, and the quiet returned, she sat by the window watching stars blaze across the dark sky. Wayne joined her, his presence steady as always. Do you ever think, she asked softly, what if I had gone with them? What if I had stayed in Deadwood? Wayne was silent for a long moment, then shook his head. No, because you didn't. Because you're here. She leaned against him, her heart full. After a lifetime of being told she was less, she had found something greater. Not in riches, not in cattle, not in a father's approval. She had found it in choice, in work, in love that did not demand but offered. The cabin glowed behind them, warm against the chill. The mountains stood silent, eternal. And in that stillness, Abigail knew she was no longer the girl sold as useless. She was a wife, a teacher, a woman of the Black Hills. And this place, this rough, beautiful, hard-won place, was home.